There comes a day when the empath's heart stops begging to be understood, when the ache that once called itself love begins to sound like exhaustion. You no longer rush to rescue, to explain, to heal. You simply watch the storm, and for the first time, you stay still. Peace has finally become louder than pain, but this silence feels almost dangerous, doesn't it? Have you truly healed, or have you simply shut down? And what does peace become when it no longer needs to please? You didn't become an empath because you were born soft. You became one because, at some point, your survival depended on it. Your nervous system learned to read every subtle change in tone, every sigh, every silence, because love, in your earliest world, was unpredictable. You studied moods the way others studied language. You became fluent in other people's storms. It began as instinct, not virtue, a child's quiet alchemy of safety. You learned that peace in the room meant peace in your body, that keeping others calm kept you alive. So you smiled when you wanted to cry, soothed when you wanted to scream, apologized for existing before anyone had the chance to accuse you. What the world later called compassion, your psyche once called self-protection. Jung would have recognized this as the formation of the persona, the mask we build to survive within the unpredictable emotional climates of others. Behind that mask lived the unspoken belief: if I can feel everything, maybe I can prevent the next explosion. But each time you anticipated someone else's pain, you abandoned your own. This is where the empath's myth begins, not in love, but in adaptation. The empath archetype is the child who became psychic because nobody was listening. It's the one who sensed tension in the air and mistook it for responsibility. And as you grew older, this psychic vigilance evolved into empathy so refined it felt spiritual. You could feel others' suffering as if it were your own, but that gift came with a hidden cost: the erosion of selfhood. Jung might say you had entered the collective waters of the unconscious far too soon. The waters of others' emotions became your home, and in that sea you lost the shore of your own boundaries. You learned to identify safety not with inner truth, but with harmony, even false harmony. And so your kindness became both your virtue and your cage. For years, you thought being good meant disappearing. You called it empathy, but deep down, your soul called it exile. You've probably noticed it, the strange rhythm that keeps replaying itself through your life. Different faces, different names, but the same ache beneath them all. You open your heart to someone who seems gentle, wounded, or misunderstood. You feel their pain like an ancient echo. You believe that if you can love them enough, they'll finally remember who they are. But soon, the same pattern unfolds. You begin to shrink, to explain, to rescue. Their storm becomes your weather again. It's not a curse. It's not bad luck. It's the psyche's ancient strategy called recurrence, the way the unconscious replays unresolved pain until it's finally met with consciousness instead of compulsion. Jung saw this as the psyche's self-correcting mechanism. When something essential remains unhealed, it returns, not to punish, but to integrate. Each heartbreak, each betrayal, each moment you felt unseen was not the universe mocking you. It was the self, trying once more to lead you home. You've been unconsciously seeking the parent through the lover, the peace through chaos, the validation through sacrifice. And every time the cycle repeats, you tell yourself, maybe this time will be different if I love harder. But the truth is, it can't be different until you are. In your dreams, the message repeats itself through symbols. Perhaps you've dreamed of a flood, the water rising as you pull others to safety, their faces blurring, your strength fading. No matter how hard you try, the water keeps coming. That flood is not punishment, it's revelation. It shows how your compassion has been drowning you, how the collective emotions you absorb have become your ocean. Water, in Jungian language, is the unconscious itself, vast, emotional, and borderless. And the empath, by nature, lives too close to its depths. The task now is not to save everyone from drowning, but to find dry land, your own solid ground. Because peace is not the absence of storms, it's the mastery of your footing while they pass. When you stand on your inner ground, the flood no longer terrifies you. It becomes a mirror, showing you where you end and the world begins. Each relationship that broke you was never about them. They were symbols, messengers from the deeper self, sent to test whether you could love without losing yourself. Until the lesson is learned, the psyche will send another storm, another reflection, another opportunity to choose differently. This is the paradox: your suffering was your teacher. And the universe, or perhaps your own unconscious, will keep repeating the same lesson until love becomes conscious enough to stop rescuing and start recognizing. There comes a quiet moment when you realize that your compassion has been wearing armor. It looked like love, it felt like generosity, but beneath it pulsed a quiet terror, the fear of being useless if you're not saving someone. You didn't mean to become a savior. It happened slowly, disguised as care. Each rescue made you feel briefly significant, momentarily safe. Someone needed you, and that need felt like proof of worth. But hidden beneath the light of your kindness was the shadow of control, the belief that if you could fix another's pain, you could finally rest from your own. Jung would call this the savior complex, an archetypal possession of the soul by the instinct to redeem. It's the same energy that drives prophets into deserts and lovers into ruin. You became the one who feels responsible for everyone's healing, the silent priestess of other people's wounds. But the Savior's path, when left unconscious, is lined with exhaustion and resentment, because each act of salvation secretly demands gratitude that never arrives. You felt it, haven't you? That quiet bitterness after giving everything, only to find yourself emptied. The resentment that whispers, "Why can't anyone see what I do for them?" That whisper is your shadow, the neglected self crying out beneath the weight of your holy mask. In dreams, the savior archetype often appears as someone carrying a wounded child through fire, refusing to let go even as their own body burns. The dream isn't cruelty, it's revelation. It shows that the compulsion to rescue is not love, it's fear disguised as virtue. The fear that if you're not saving someone, you're nothing. You believed that peace would arrive once everyone else was healed, but peace cannot enter through control. To heal this archetype, you must let others fall. You must allow their pain to teach them, not you. The empath's initiation requires a radical surrender, the recognition that love does not mean interference. The true healer does not pull another from the dark. They hold a lantern until the other decides to walk. Jung spoke of individuation as the process of withdrawing projections, seeing where you've mistaken another's growth for your own redemption. When you stop rescuing others, the psychic energy you once spent outwardly begins to return inward. You start noticing the child within who still waits to be saved by someone's understanding. That child is the one you've been trying to rescue in everyone else. The savior archetype transforms not through sacrifice, but through containment, the ability to sit beside another's pain without absorbing it. That's the alchemy of conscious compassion. It neither rescues nor abandons, it simply witnesses. When you finally embody that, you move from savior to healer, from control to peace. And peace, as you'll soon discover, isn't a gift you find in others. It's a ground you reclaim within yourself. The first time you say no, the world trembles, not because your refusal is violent, but because it is sacred, a sound your soul has waited lifetimes to make. The same people who once praised your endless giving now shift uncomfortably in your presence. They call you distant, cold, unrecognizable. They say, "You've changed." They're right. You have. You've stopped mistaking exhaustion for love. When the empath withdraws, it's rarely graceful. It's more like a crucifixion, a psychological death that tears away everything false. You discover that the peace you've chosen cost your belonging. Jung wrote that individuation demands a separation from the collective, an exile from the approval that once defined you. It is the moment Christ stepped into silence while the crowd shouted for more miracles. You used to turn water into wine for everyone's comfort. Now you let them thirst until they seek their own well. It hurts. Not the solitude, but the misunderstanding. You've spent your life reading emotions like sacred texts, yet now your language feels foreign. They cannot see that your withdrawal is not rejection, but renewal, that you are learning to love without the poison of self-erasure. In dreams, this stage often appears as a house on fire. You stand at its doorway, while voices inside scream your name, begging you to return. The flames represent all the identities burning away, the caretaker, the pleaser, the savior. To walk away from that house feels like betrayal, but staying would mean suffocation. The house burns because the old self can no longer contain your spirit. This is the archetype of the sacred refusal, the soul's rebellion against collective demand. Moses left Egypt, Buddha left the palace, Christ left the crowd. The empath must also leave the emotional systems that feed on her endless mercy. You may notice a strange phenomenon during this stage. Silence begins to terrify people. They fill it with accusations, with noise, with guilt. But silence is your initiation. It's the space where your boundaries harden not into walls but into roots. Jung described this transformation as the alchemy of the self, the death of persona and the birth of authentic presence. And though the world crucifies the empath who finally chooses herself, that crucifixion is not the end. It is the crossing into sacred solitude, where the soul learns that peace is not passivity, it is power in stillness. So if they call you cruel, smile gently. You are not unkind, you are becoming whole. You are learning that love without boundaries is not love, but martyrdom. And from the ashes of that burning house, something luminous begins to rise, not a rescuer, but a sovereign. It isn't the world that truly tests you after you set your boundaries. It's the voices inside. They come like ghosts, soft at first, then merciless. They whisper, "You've become selfish. You're abandoning them. Who are you, if not the one who gives?" This is the moment most empaths retreat, not because the outer world condemns them, but because the inner one does. What you're hearing is not your soul, it's the echo of your conditioning. Those voices are fragments of the old psyche, internalized parents, teachers, lovers, the collective chorus of a lifetime spent equating love with self-erasure. Jung called this the guardian of the threshold, the psychic force that tests every traveler before they cross into higher consciousness. Its task is simple, to ensure you are ready to live without your old identities. Each pang of guilt is a riddle. Do you still need their approval to believe you're good? Each hesitation asks, can you hold peace even when no one applauds it? To pass this test, you must look guilt in the eyes and see it for what it is, a doorway, not a verdict. Because guilt often disguises itself as conscience, but it's actually nostalgia for a self you've outgrown. You're not betraying love by choosing rest. You're betraying the illusion that love must hurt to count. In dreams, guilt often takes the form of children crying behind a locked door, your inner selves still trapped in old emotional contracts. You hear them call your name, and part of you wants to rush back, to open the door, to prove once again that you're the good one. But every time you return to silence them, you lose yourself again. The dream's wisdom is this: the children are not asking to be saved, they're asking to be seen. When you stop rushing to fix them and simply listen, they begin to quiet. Their tears become rain, nourishing the ground where new life can grow. This is where the alchemy of guilt unfolds. The black lead of shame begins to transmute into gold awareness. You see that guilt was never proof of wrongdoing. It was evidence of awakening. Only those who have lived by self-sacrifice feel guilty for choosing peace. Jung wrote that the individuated soul must be willing to disappoint others to remain faithful to itself. This is your sacred disobedience, the rebellion that births freedom. Every no you speak to old patterns becomes a yes to the life waiting beyond them. And gradually, as you refuse to atone for your boundaries, something begins to shift. The voices lose their authority. Guilt softens into grace. You begin to realize it's not that you've stopped caring. It's that you've stopped confusing care with captivity. What was once unbearable silence now feels like sanctuary. You sit within it, breathing differently, not in vigilance, but in reverence. The empath, who once drowned in others, has learned the first true act of love: to stay on her own side of the shore. At first, solitude feels like exile. After years of defining yourself through others' emotions, the quiet can sound unbearable, a kind of spiritual tinnitus that echoes with everything you've ever lost. You keep expecting someone to arrive to ask for help, to pull you back into the familiar dance of giving and depletion. But no one comes, only silence. And in that silence, something begins to stir. At first it feels foreign, like a presence watching from beneath your skin. You think it might be loneliness, but it isn't. It's you. The part of you that had been waiting behind everyone else's needs finally steps forward, blinking in the unfamiliar light. For the first time, you hear your own heartbeat without it being drowned by another's. This is the sacred middle space Jung called the negredo, the blackening, the alchemical stage where everything that is not essential dissolves. It's not destruction, it's purification. All your old identities, the caretaker, the pleaser, the empath who saves, are burned down to ash so that the true self can begin to breathe through what remains. In that inner darkness, you stop asking, who do they need me to be? And start whispering, who am I when I'm not needed? Solitude, when consciously entered, becomes a crucible of transformation. You begin to sense what Jung named the transcendent function, the invisible bridge forming between the conscious and the unconscious. At night, your dreams change. You may see a tree growing through an empty room, its roots spreading where furniture once stood. That tree is yourself, expanding quietly into spaces you once filled with others' voices. Each root represents a truth rediscovered, each branch an aspect of your soul reaching toward light. Slowly, peace stops being an effort. You no longer chase it. It begins to emanate. The silence that once felt unbearable becomes alive. It hums with subtle presence, a shimmering awareness that doesn't need words or affirmation. You realize that solitude was never the absence of love. It was the soil where love becomes whole. This is the albedo phase of the alchemical process, the whitening, the purification after the burn. You start to feel clarity, stillness, a quiet luminosity that doesn't depend on external harmony. It's not happiness, it's deeper than that. It's being. You notice beauty in ordinary things, the sound of wind through curtains, the rhythm of your own breath. These are not small comforts, they are sacred confirmations that life continues within you, even without an audience. The empath who once read every room now reads her own atmosphere. She tends her inner climate with care, choosing what thoughts to allow, what energies to entertain. This is self-love not as indulgence, but as stewardship. And here, in the sanctuary of your solitude, you begin to understand the paradox that once haunted you. You were never meant to save everyone. You were meant to remember that the one who saves and the one who suffers were always the same soul, divided by fear, now reunited by peace. You are no longer lonely in your silence. You are accompanied by the self, vast, ancient, endlessly patient, and as its presence fills you, you begin to feel a quiet golden knowing. Peace was never something you had to find. It was what remained when you stopped leaving yourself. There comes a moment, almost imperceptible, when you realize the world no longer feels heavy against your skin. The same energies that once pierced you now pass through like wind through an open field. You walk into familiar spaces, and where you once absorbed everything, you now emanate something instead. A quiet strength, a peace that asks for nothing. This is the return, the conjunctio, the final stage of the alchemical cycle, where light and shadow, giver and receiver, self and world, finally remember their belonging to one another. You are no longer an empath defined by suffering. You are an awareness clothed in compassion. You've learned to love without losing yourself, to open without leaking, to feel without drowning. And in that balance, you become medicine simply by existing. People begin to notice it. They can't name it, but they feel it. A calm gravity in your presence, a sense that being near you steadies something inside them. It's not because you're fixing them, it's because you're no longer trying to. You've become what Jung called the wounded healer, not the savior who sacrifices herself, but the one who transforms pain into wisdom and offers it as light. Your love has changed its texture. It no longer rushes forward. It simply radiates. It waits for resonance instead of recognition. And when someone treats you carelessly now, something miraculous happens. You don't collapse. Your boundaries no longer feel like walls. They feel like wings. You can step back without bitterness, speak truth without tremor, let go without fear of vanishing. This is what maturity feels like, the integration of empathy and discernment. You understand now that love is not a transaction of energy, but a field of consciousness. Those who can meet you there will rise to meet it. Those who cannot will drift away. There is no punishment in this, only resonance finding its natural rhythm. In dreams, the imagery shifts again. No longer floods or burning houses, but a radiant tree, roots deep in the earth, branches luminous against the sky. This is the self, the symbol Jung called the totality of being. You stand at its base, hands open, heart unarmored. You have become both the tree and the one who beholds it. And so, when life brings you people again, lovers, friends, strangers, you don't rush to merge. You meet them from fullness, not from hunger. You give without expectation, and your love becomes something clean, almost transparent, not an escape from yourself, but an extension of your peace. This is when you finally understand the two questions that began your journey. Have you truly healed, or have you simply shut down? And what does peace become when it no longer needs to please? You smile because now you know. Healing is not hardening, it's softening in truth. Peace that no longer pleases becomes power, not over others, but over your own energy. It is the ability to remain open in a world that once demanded your collapse. And as you move through life, there's a quiet, steady grace in your presence, the kind that comes when a soul has returned to itself. You are not the empath who saves, you are the healer who sees. And your peace, finally, is not withdrawal, it is radiance.